But then what you're getting at is cloning the actual knowledge. But I definitely couldn't have worn it in my first job out of college.
And effectively throw it away because the cost is going to come down so much to generate.
I think that's probably the most immediate impact we're going to see, right? I think it will change dramatically.
Hey, good morning, David. Welcome back.
Good morning, Peter. Hey, good morning. Welcome back to Call Me Data.
How are you this morning?
I am fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm good. I see we both have gotten bright. Well, yours is far more interesting than my boring orange, but I get tired of wearing the same old blues and whites. I think I need to stand out a little bit more.
You know, the funny part is when we're not doing this podcast, I'm usually just wearing like a gray or an olive green t-shirt or something like pretty drab and boring. So
well, you and I both. I mean, seriously, like, when, all kidding aside, when was the last time you tied a tie?
Actually, I had a nightmare the other night that I had to go somewhere and I forgot how to tie a tie. I literally woke up thinking, oh my God, what if I've forgotten how to tie a tie? It's been that long.
It's been a long time.
I'd say a couple of years at least.
You know what? I don't know if it's been quite that long, only because I think I had to go to a wedding and had to remember how to tie a tie. But by and large, for a person who used to have like at least 15 suits from working on finance for so many years, I now have, I think, one suit and about 50, well, probably more than that, about 100 ties, which again, never use them anymore. They're gathering dust.
Yep.
And I like it that way.
The feeling.
I'd rather see you wear a Aloha shirt.
It's my anti-tie phase. And it's something that I never could have worn in my previous careers.
No.
In banking or before that Actually, I could have gotten away with it in a software company. I worked in a software company for several years where the CEO actually was an Aloha shirt fan. But I definitely couldn't have worn it in my first job out of college because that was a job in the consulting industry. And it was in one of the very buttoned-up consulting firms in the era of the Big Eight. Do you remember when those accounting firms were the Big Eight?
Yeah, of course. I remember them very well.
Yeah. So I worked for one of the Big Eight, and it was in fact, I had a friend who got chastised by a senior partner one day. The senior partner literally stopped the elevator to ask my friend why he was wearing a pale pink Brooks Brothers button down in the office. He said, we wear two colors of shirts here at firm, insert firm name here. Every day you wear a white shirt and you have one blue shirt. And when you get to the blue shirt, you know it's time to do laundry. Son, get rid of that pink shirt. This is a true story.
I know those days. I remember how they were. So you started in, and I recall which one I think you started in. I took the opposite approach. My first job was actually in a small software company. So I showed up in jeans and t-shirt for the first couple of years of my job until I actually transitioned into wearing suits and ties. And I made it to finance, and then my first finance job was, of all places, it was actually Goldman Sachs. And I talk about button down.
Yeah, I was gonna say you went from one extreme to the other very quickly.
Yes, well, I did.
And serendipitously, this is actually a good segue because we're going to talk about consulting firms today. And a lot has changed at consulting firms beyond just the dress code.
Right.
And I think, we've talked previously about the legal industry, and we sort of touch upon lots of other professions and how AI is going to impact those professions. And I think last week we promised to spend some time this week talking about consulting and what AI means for that. And look, it's near and dear to our hearts because we are in the consulting and advisory business now. So we're experiencing it firsthand. We're driving some of that change firsthand. We're testing it out.
Yeah,
and lots of other things.
We're living and breathing all of this firsthand. And I think, before we really dive in, I think when you and I started this consulting firm way back when, we were still, obviously it was all AI based, and we thought about how we're going to use AI. And I think even us, we were still using it on the periphery. And it's taken a while for us to kind of wrap our minds around things and really say, hey, you know what? The first question has to be hire a person or use AI. And I think now it's always AI first and then, people second. And it's been a big transition. Anyway, so it led us to, I think, a lot of opinions on how the consulting firm and consulting in general is going to change.
Absolutely. So what's the headline though? I think everyone's always like looking for the headline on this. Would you say consulting is going to be destroyed by AI, or would you say consulting is going to be changed by AI? Like, how would you summarize?
I think a couple of things. I mean, I don't know if there's a headline, but I think certainly consulting, I think, and well, I think both of us think it's going to be changed quite dramatically for a whole slew of reasons. And I depend if you look at either management consulting or technology consulting. I think if I had to pick a headline that I thought was interesting, maybe it's kind of the decline of low cost, low skill labor arbitrage. Like, offshoring, I think in general for technology jobs, I think that if I had to look at this is going to change quite dramatically. I would think with the tools. I don't know. What do you think, David?
No, I think let's start with offshoring, because I think that's probably the most immediate impact we're going to see, right? I think it will change dramatically. I mean, companies do offshoring for a lot of reasons. They do it for, sometimes they want to have resources in different geographies to help facilitate a follow the sun approach. Sometimes it's strategic, but often they do it for cost savings reasons, right? Simply that they can send tasks offshore and have them done in lower cost areas of the world compared to, hiring system engineers and developers in the U.S., for example. That labor arbitrage is probably going to be under direct threat, if it's not already, from AI and AI code generation. You saw what's happened at some of the large hyperscalers over the last month or so, which is they've announced significant cutbacks in engineering resources because they're using AI very effectively.
Right, and I think you're going to see that now. I mean, look, if I look at offshoring and, having worked with offshore teams, and this is not to diss offshore teams, I don't want to go there and say, they're better or worse than U.S.-based teams. I think there are natural issues with offshoring in general and lack of communication, or loss of communication just through time and everything else, and loss of time through, many, what do you call, being 6-8 hours away, 12 hours away sometimes. And there are, let's be honest, there are definitely cultural differences between teams that often lead to issues and non-communication with the business team since they're so far away.
And let me jump on that point really quickly. I also find that there's a certain skill set required to manage offshore teams, and a lot of organizations don't have it. They treat the offshore teams like it's just another group of employees. Maybe it's employees working the evening shift, right? And they don't consciously figure out how to manage effectively these teams that are, in its different locations. So
right. So I want to throw something out there real quick, and it's always kind of bothered me. And there's a reason why it came to my head. I always, we humans generally look at a service and we say if it's pricier in general, we think the quality is therefore better. Now, I think, look, high quality engineering talent, I think, is the same, but historically it's not been viewed that way. It's always been viewed as a cost center or an operational expense, and the cost has always been, we got to get less, and less, and not more and more. And technology was viewed not as a business enabler or a force multiplier or anything like that for most companies, but merely as an expense to do things faster or do things better or track things better. It wasn't viewed as a business edge. Some companies clearly view it as such and value technology and great engineers. Many don't. Most don't, I think. And I think where I was going with this is, so hence it made sense, I think, to offshore a lot to less costly regions. There was that, like I said, was that arbitrage. I always thought that was kind of a false sense of, I don't know, security, what do you want to call it? It was not the right way to go about it. You were getting lower costs, but generally speaking, and again, not at this end, you were more often not getting less quality for a whole slew of reasons. And I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to say?
No, I think so. Look, that focus on cost over quality has been an albatross around the IT industry's neck for a long time, right? And generally, you're right. It's almost viewed as the same as like manufacturing costs or other things, right? Which is, hey, if I can get 10,000 lines produced at this cost per line versus that cost per line, why wouldn't I go with the cheaper line of code? And you're right, there are a few companies that recognize that maybe it's strategically important, but a lot of companies don't. So I just want to emphasize that point or agree with that point. It's been a misguided notion around technology for a long, long time, I think.
Right. I've always been deeply troubled by it because good people are generally expensive. They're much more money, but the level of expertise is significantly higher, and what you'll get out of them is, I think, far more than you will at an offshore team. And again, I've worked with great offshore teams too, but it's taken a long time to get them to be great. And there are good people across the world. Again, not trying to diss. I think we're just looking at things naturally and logically based on our experience. Now back to the premise of all this. AI, given that it's such a force multiplier, and using some of these tools, whether it's Claude Code or Ada or Cursor, and I was using Cursor over the weekend, or any of the other tools that are rapidly becoming available for generating code and building applications and managing code and looking at code and surveying code and generating metrics around code, whatever it may be, have gotten significantly better. They're great, actually. They're fantastic. I can do in an hour with a prompt would have taken me a month prior to that and generate some real code. There are benefits that you get with onshoring, closer communications, engineers that are close to the business. You get a better work product. You get engineers that really understand the business. Now you're giving them the tools to theoretically be a lot faster, create code a lot faster, and just have a level of not expertise, but efficiency that's significantly higher. Drops that arbitrage, or I think the cost benefit that you might have gotten quite dramatically, and with an increase in quality and consistency. Do you think that's maybe a valid point?
Well, I absolutely do, and I think that it's that benefit and the consistency, and also just I was thinking as you were saying about the onboarding time, right? Because when you bring in new people or hire a new outsourcing firm or set up a new offshore lab or whatever you're doing, right? There's a ramp up period, and that ramp up period is significant. And then as you have staff turnover, that ramp up period occurs over and over at an individual level. And so there's a lot of, and by the way, it's no different than the ramp up period you have when you hire new resources in your home country as well. But the other thing that, as you were talking about Claude Code and Cursor, the other thing that's very interesting is they can go through and ingest and effectively learn your code base, and they can do that very quickly. So that arbitrage is, I think that what is today still viewed as an arbitrage opportunity to use AI to do something at an even lower cost, or even with even less operational constraints than the time zone challenges and everything else. Pretty soon it's going to be mandatory, because people are going to see that there's a price gap in there, and they're going to insist on getting lower costs. Right, back to what we were talking about with everyone's always chasing value in their technology spend.
Chasing quality and opportunity. And look, you've worked in an organization, when you're close proximity to the business, the quality of output goes up dramatically. And again, the tools have gotten so good, it doesn't make rational sense anymore to have somebody sit between me and an offshore team, or a business person and an offshore team that's going to translate what the business says, and then an offshore team. If I can have an engineer sitting next to the business, can be creating the same output, iterating over 45 times before you're going to write a document that you're going to send offshore, and you can have a couple of meetings about to see what they actually want. It just doesn't make practical sense. And I'll say it defies the laws of physics. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a lot of situations in which having a competent engineer plus some AI coding agents, you can get immediate feedback, you can iterate through things. And, one of the things, and it sort of dovetails with the conversation about quality versus cost. A lot of people are saying, yes, but AI agents don't code as well as really good humans. And I think I want to hear you address that in a second, because I know you and I've had some real conversations about what does it take to get the right output from an AI coding agent. But so I don't want to step on that answer, and I want to hear your answer. But I also think in so many cases it doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is, most organizations have a relatively small percentage of the applications. We're talking larger organizations, right? They may have thousands of applications. A couple hundred of them are going to be absolutely core and strategic, and those need to be rock solid. They need to perform. They need to be secure. They need to be resilient, etc., etc. But then you have many more that are just these administrative applications that get run once a quarter, or used infrequently, or have low volume usage. They're not doing mission critical tasks. They have to work, But is it really such a sin if they're not the most efficient, if they are taking roundabout ways to do things, right? So I know it's maybe sounds like a little bit of a hot take, but I'm sort of like, not every application has to be world class in its architecture and design. It's okay to have some, look, go back to the woodworking analogy, or like my really bad, home workshop. The tools I use a lot, I want a really good tool. The tools I'm going to use once in a while, I'll go buy the Harbor Freight cheapo, and if it lasts for 6 uses and breaks, that's okay. So
100%. No, I totally agree with that. So I got a little, I don't know, I think it hit me a dream last night, the concept of the throwaway application, because I think the tools have gotten so sophisticated. I can take a sophisticated business user who is somewhat technical, and I don't think we're far away from this, where they have an idea, they have a problem they need to solve in code. They go do it themselves, and there'll be a platform or to just generate, run, and effectively throw it away, because the cost is going to come down so much to generate. In the past, it either wouldn't have gotten done, it would have gotten done a year from now because there wasn't enough budget resources, and it would have probably been sent offshore to have it done that way, and it never would. So my point is, the cost is the cost is coming down, the quality is going up, the consistency is going up. I think back to your question about quality. So let's go there for a second. I think you and I have spoken about this many times. What it takes, I think, is you still need to be a good engineer. I think what's really important is to be able to articulate a problem very clearly. And you and I have taught this in our class. It's being able to articulate something in a prompt in a very articulate fashion is absolutely critical. And if having knowledge about the language that's getting generated, so you can guide it on how to generate the code and go there. I mean, we've all seen plenty of sample applications online where somebody's created asteroids in 3 minutes using one of the prompts. But if you want to generate a real application that is going to be production worthy, you need a little bit more than that. You need to go a lot deeper. And I think an engineer that understands the broader technical architectures, that they're using, but is also really effective at communicating and articulating an application is incredibly important. You need to be able to put that down in words. That is hard for a lot of people. Disagree?
It's
great.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's funny because it goes, once again, it sort of brings back that analogy that an AI coding agent is a little bit like an intern or a fresh out of university hire, which is they have skills, they have knowledge, but they need a lot of guidance, and their success will be directly dependent upon the quality and the clarity and the specificity of the guidance they're given. So it's also funny that everything you just described goes against the sort of, we'll say, the public image of what a software developer is like, right? You have this idea of like the hacker who sits behind the keyboard and is antisocial and chugging energy drinks all day and whatever.
Yep.
Right. And communication skills and that sort of clarity and structured thinking are not things that you often think of as being rewarded in the tech industry or sought after.
No, I mean, and the benefit I think that comes out is you obviously have when an engineer sits there and really articulates their vision and tools go up and generate the code, you have a really detailed, basically a set of requirements, so to speak, of what you're building. I think so. You get these outputs, these artifacts that are incredibly helpful. I think more we had spoke about the throwaway apps versus the bigger applications, and you're right. There's a certain number of applications out there that are absolutely critical to an organization. You're not going to turn those over to a coding assistant quite yet. But that said, any application you build, there is a lot of code that is just, we'll call it operational code. We'll call it basic code. The code that does maybe the low level, networking communication, or deals with the message queues, or puts stuff in databases, all that kind of code. Stuff that's just, it's boring code, relatively easy to write. Any junior developer can do it, and it takes a lot of time. And obviously you can create problems with it, and it can have error prone. But that, even on a big complicated application, there are large swaths of code that can be generated. Again, I know we're getting off the beaten path a little bit with offshoring conversations, but all that can be brought home.
100% agree. Let's then apply this to consulting, right? Because certainly one of the things that a lot of consulting companies do, and a big demand that they meet from their customers, is they supply technical resources to do development, and it can be in a couple of different ways, right? It can be sort of called the staff augmentation mode, which is where a client might say, hey, I need 5 more people with this skill. I don't have enough people available right now with this skill. Can you give me some of these people, right? It might be some Java developers or DBAs or whatever it is, and so they provide sort of a liquidity to the skills gap that a company might have. And then, and that can go from supplying individual resources, staff augmentation, or that can be more, supplying whole teams of people. At the other end of the spectrum, it can be deliverable based, where you hire a consulting firm to create an entire application and they own it turnkey, end to end, they deliver it to you. Or even all the way up to you can outsource whole parts of your IT organization to these firms. And I want to come back to the whole parts, because some people outsource, network ops or other things. But let's stay with development, since that's where we started for a minute. Okay, so there's a level setting. How, what you just described, does that dramatically change the landscape over the next couple of years for staff augmentation and software development consulting?
Oh, I think 100% it does. I see, and you and I have spoken about a couple of things that come to mind as you were speaking. I see a model where a lot of companies will reshore to U.S.-based or domestic-based resources. I think the cost benefit goes down, because, you're not, like I explained, offshoring, there's obviously, maybe it's less expensive, but there are other downsides. I call it the offshore tax, which is also extraordinarily high. Bringing things onshore to U.S. developers, I think there are significant benefits to having close proximity to the business. Having developers that are much better versed in the business, much better versed in U.S.-based development, all this kind of stuff, I think is extraordinarily beneficial. I think, and I had this conversation with another consulting firm not too long ago, where they asked me if I would ever potentially utilize their offshore resources, and I gave the answer they probably didn't want, which was no. It didn't make any sense. I would see reshoring back to the U.S. because the benefit's gone way down. And I do see a path like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these offshore teams will still be doing other types of work, but just more efficiently with the same tools. You can't make up with. There are certain things and you can't get around. And all the time differential, the communication differential, all the other differences that go into developing software, which happens to be a much more personal type of thing. There's a lot more human interaction. There's a lot more. So when you're distant, you lose a lot. Having somebody local or face to face, or being able to walk into the office occasionally, goes a long way. You can't always put a firm number on that.
No, I totally agree. And one of the things as you were saying, I was thinking about conversation I had with someone a couple of years ago, and they were talking about, they had a success story with their offshore team they are partnering with. And basically one of the things they said they really liked is the fact that they could sit down with the business user, describe some changes to the system. They could spend a few hours that day carefully writing up those changes and articulating, maybe providing some examples of what they wanted the application to behave like. And they could send that off to the offshore team, and they would work on it overnight. And in a lot of cases, they could come back into the office the next morning and have a new version of the code to test out. And they rightfully said, this is amazing. This is, so much different than the way we're used to working. I can get back to the client the next day and say, hey, does this look more like what you wanted? And if the client said, well, okay, but now what if we change this? They'd repeat that, and the next day they'd have another version. And that was amazing. Except now, why would you want to wait a day? Because you could do that same process in a few minutes.
I was just going to say, why not take the client there and just do it on the fly?
Yeah. I mean, the part that I thought was good about that is they did take the time to be precise and detailed and clearly articulate what they wanted to change, which goes back to your point, Peter, which is you've got to put in the effort to be clear and concise about what you want. But once you've done that, hit the button and let the agents come back with something, and you'll have an answer, a testable version in moments, and you could iterate 4 times a day, not once every
couple days,
24 hours.
I agree. Look, to me, this makes such a compelling case to reshore your technology. And, look, you could evaluate the existing code base. You can apply some metrics to it. You can even rebuild some of it with better tools. so that it gets better for, not a lot of money. I think reshoring is going to be, I think, the wave of the future. Now, something popped in my mind. I know we have this long list of things that we wanted to talk about here, whether we get through it or not. So you and I always kind of
go
past a lot. We'll figure it out. We always do. The concept of, and I'm going to use Databricks as an example. Whatever reason, it seems to be, getting embraced by a lot of different companies. And, a lot of what Databricks does is they have firms that actually will outsource development of Databricks applications for them. Now, doesn't it behoove you and make sense if Databricks was create a customized, fine-tuned model for the creation of Databricks code and deploy that within Databricks? And they might have. I don't know if they have or not. I haven't looked, but I'm just kind of using Databricks as a potential example. Given they have, obviously, a wealth of, one, knowledge, two, code samples to generate a fine-tuned model that they can then deploy to their users to onboard or use Databricks far more effectively than using outsourcing teams. Don't you see maybe that's happening over time with some of these firms?
I love the idea. And in fact, I don't know if you remember this. It was sometime, I think it was even late last year. It was a long time ago. Databricks did announce, at the time when every company was announcing their own model, they announced a model, I think, called DBX. That was the large language
something
model.
like that.
To be honest, I haven't followed it. I haven't tried to intentionally follow it, and I haven't heard anything about it in a long, long time. So maybe they're doing what you said. But yes, I would think as a software, as a provider of a development environment like that, absolutely, you would want to offer, why let someone else take this part of the business? Like, offer a model that is an expert level AI coding model that is, as you said, familiar with the tools, the documentation, the best practices, the architecture patterns at work, et cetera, and that would be great.
I don't see, when you use these tools, you use multiple models and have my Databricks specific model for that portion of the code that I'm generated, or whatever database I'm choosing, whatever the tool I'm using. But having these fine-tuned models that are germane to the technology, I think, is, rather than using a big foundational model all the time, might be the way to go for a lot of these vendors. But that's also going to cut heavily into consulting businesses.
Absolutely. And here's the interesting thing about consulting businesses is they offer you flexibility. I used to work at a consulting firm that talked about flex and surge capability. You could add resources to a project and you could take them off, and right. But a nimble flex and surge model might still be days, if not weeks, and sometimes months to bring on and release people. Right, like you're not literally having someone walk in the door and saying, "Yeah, we decided we don't need you today. Go home. If we need you next week, we'll call you." That's not an economy that many people would willingly participate in. So flex and surge is all relative. But you go back to it. But that's part of the benefit that AI firms do offer their customers is you don't have to have full-time employees. You're not making this
something we do
commitment to them, right? However, now look at the, AI is not going to, first of all, it's not going to get its feelings hurt if you say, well, I'm not going to use you today. And you can literally, you're only paying for the days you use it. You're paying for the compute in most AI, beyond maybe a base level subscription fee. For most agentic AI, you're going to pay for usage, for consumption in some way, shape, or form. And the AI doesn't get bothered if you decide that you don't need it this week. Right. It's not like, oh, I put a tie on today and I came to the office. What do you mean you don't want me? Right? AI is fine with that. It's like, all right, I'll sit here on the shelf until you do want me.
Exactly.
And the other cool thing is, if the opposite happens, you're like, oh, I do need you. Could you bring 10 friends? Right? AI says, sure, we'll just turn the dial up and we'll generate 10 more agents, and now you have 11 agents instead of one. Right? And how often in the consulting business do people joke about, oh, if we could just clone these guys, it'd be great, right? Like,
well, now I want to hang on that word for a second, so I'm going to cut you off for a second because you and I have spoken about this at length. How often do we say, clone you and me, and the 35 years of experience we each have, and that value and that knowledge and encode it into a model, and how valuable that would be?
Right. No, 100%. And that's that cloning. So first of all, there's the duplicating and scaling up. Hugely valuable just if you do that. But then what you're getting at is cloning the actual knowledge. And that's another area where I'm afraid it's going to sound like I'm saying, trying to tell consulting firms they're doomed, and I'm not. But there are challenges, and there will be changes ahead. And one of them is, the thing you always hear when people worry about hiring a consulting firm is, oh, I'm training someone else. I'm putting knowledge and know-how and intellectual property in the heads of someone who could walk out the door tomorrow. Now, I do think that's a little bit of an overblown thing, because as we now know, your employees could walk out the door tomorrow too.
Same, right?
And
same.
it's becoming more and more common because, let's be honest, companies are not treating employees like valuable parts of the company anymore. Most employees at most companies, feel pretty disposable, and loyalty is dead. You hear that all the time. But knowledge retention, let's talk about that, because that's maybe something that's less commonly talked about with the use of AI for coding, especially, is how do you retain knowledge? So what do you think about that? Like, how can you do that?
No, I think you bring up a great point. Like, how many times somebody's built an application? It's complicated. I come from building trading systems world. Those systems are monolithic beasts that are incredibly complicated, and it takes a new developer. It can take them months to come up to a reasonable amount of speed so they can add some value. There's just too many pieces of code. There's 500,000, 1,000,000 lines of code. It just takes time. I think with the tools, you get a lot of value and benefit. One is being able to understand what's there quicker, because you can ask questions of the code, I think, in ways you couldn't before. So it basically becomes your code tutor. Two, just the fact of creation, the part of just creating that code, you're creating these artifacts which articulate what you're building. And I think those chats, those transcripts are incredibly valuable. So you're basically capturing all this knowledge firsthand during the creation process, which in the past you didn't. I'm sorry, a set of requirement documents, it'll tell you stuff, but it's not going to tell you the code works. That's a different animal. And I think having these tools to pour over the code, document the code, explain the code, and then artifacts in the creation of the code go a long, very, very, very long way into reducing the amount of time it gets to get someone up to speed and actually create value. And again, that tax is high. Getting a new developer onto a job and having them contribute you lose months usually before somebody can do something.
All right, so we've talked. I want to hear the flip side now. So we've talked about a lot of the ways in which using AI agents is very powerful and could be in some ways better than offshoring, better than hiring a consultant. Right? We talked about the economics of it. Let's revive that one in a second. We talked about the time zone, having someone there 24 hours versus being a time zone away. We talked about the immediate connection to an AI agent, and the fast turnaround. We talked about knowledge preservation. It's easy to make it sound like a no-brainer and like, well, geez, why would consulting firms even exist today? Holy cow! Like, if I can do all of this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the flip side. Like, what are still the challenges? Like, what's hard about onshoring? What's hard about using AI agents instead of people? What do companies need to figure out in order to make this all work? Because it's not all,
no, it's not all
puppies and rainbows.
I was trying to come up with something like that. I was going to say unicorns, but hey, we'll go with puppies and rainbows. I like that one better. No, I'm not going to argue that it's a simple process. The first look, I think it's like anything else. The first one or two projects you reshore are going to be difficult. You're going to learn the ropes. You're going to gain the knowledge of what it takes to start onshoring projects. Obviously, finding help or finding engineers domestically is always part of the challenge. Finding good engineers domestically is always going to be a big part of the challenge. Learning the capabilities of some of the tools and their limitations is part of the challenge. And making sure that you have engineers that, again, can communicate well with these tools in a way that they make them most effective is also part of the challenge. Onshoring, it's bringing that talent locally. It's going to be I'm going to say it's all easy. It's not. Understanding your existing code base, learning that code base, all of those things. Even the fact that you're bringing things from offshore to onshore is going to create people issues, because you're going to have a firm or whoever you're outsourcing to feel not happy that you're reshoring all this work. That creates issues. The lack of communication, all that's going to create problems. I don't think any of that's going to be trivial. But if I was a company, if I was a CFO or a CIO or looking at this problem, I would start by moving certain applications onshore to a local development team and start there. Build up a an approach, a manual, or just how I would go about doing this, and just becomes a repeatable, or bring in a consulting firm like us to help you do that, to enable that process and start and do the understand how much the cost benefit analysis is, and have the right metrics to really say, hey, this is very cost effective, and maybe you leave some there and you'll bring a lot back. And there's some hybrid approach that makes sense for your business, and you're not bringing everything back onshore.
I like your approach of start small, build a small team, and learn to do it, because I think that's great advice. We all know, or hopefully everyone should know by now, right? Like that when a lot of companies tried to do business process outsourcing and offshoring, they stumbled. There were a lot of very unsuccessful attempts to do it because people underestimated what a big change it was. And if we move back towards onshoring, or we move towards replacing consultants, and it really is not just offshore versus onshore, it's external dependency versus internally managed AI bots, right? That's going to be a learning experience. It's going to be a transition, and you do need to have a strategy. You need to have a plan. You need to test it out. You need to learn your way through that process. And as you said, that's one of the things that we can do, is work with people to help onshore or reshore their teams, or even just help them figure out how to use agentic AI to sort of augment their team. So it's not a freebie, and like it's not like, oh, I'll just replace all these people with bots tomorrow and life will be good. It's not that easy.
No, I don't think I think the benefit is obviously, I think, going to be significant once you are engaged in this. And look, I think the whole model is going to change with regards to offshoring. Some companies, it's just an extension of an existing team. Some really say, throw it over the fence and here. And I think even in our case, if you're a company, you want to say, hey, you know what, Peter and David, I want you to run my development team locally, we would certainly be able to do that. And I was going someplace else with this, and I lost my train of thought to say that. But there are, I can't express this enough. I think there are significant benefits. I also think, I remember where I was going with this. There is a body of knowledge now in offshoring, just I think generally in corporate America, on, I don't say how to go about doing it, but there are some rules, or it's much more, people are much more aware about it, and they're much more aware of the issues when you offshore. So there's a whole ecosystem built up around offshoring. Now, I don't think reshoring is going to be anywhere nearly as complicated. Plus, you're going from, when you're offshoring, you're always offshoring, usually overseas. There's usually significant cultural differences that, never mind language barriers, but just make it more difficult. When you onshore, you lose a lot of that. That all goes away. All those issues that you encountered when you offshore, because you're bringing it back domestically, those issues really drop. I think it's a very different game you're playing.
I think you're right, but again, just to be clear, sometimes you're trading those issues for new issues, right? It's not trivial. Like, you're going to have to learn new things, but yeah.
Great.
Let's talk just a minute about the price compression effect, because this one I find very interesting, and we're seeing this across a lot of industries. But like, I could be a consultant today, and if I have people working remotely, not in your office, right? I could be using AI to do code generation today, and that could seem like, hey, I'm getting a better margin now because I have half as many employees on the payroll, and I have a lot of bots and agents, and I'm creating stuff. But I feel like we're in a window of time, and we've said this about other industries as well. There's a small and shrinking window when the buyer is paying the traditional price and the provider is using a lower cost delivery model. And that just means lots of extra margin for that seller, that provider. But when those buyers wise up and realize that there are now ways for the provider to deliver at lower cost, what are they going to do? They're going to lower the price they're willing to pay. They're going to put that margin back to what they feel is an acceptable profit margin for the provider.
Maybe. Yeah, I thought about that actually. Maybe. And I'm not 100% sure I know exactly what you're saying. I get one time horizon is to be determined on that. Like, how long is it going to take for that, things start to come down? I do believe they'll be definitely come down, or is the opposite holds true, that we're just generating more work now with the same resource, but the compensation's basically the same, but they're doing 2 or 3x what they were doing before. and that number stays the
Yeah.
same. And maybe it's obviously less people from their perspective, they're using a smaller team. Or are we just continually staying ahead of the curve and seeing what other benefit that we can add, even with these set of tools, and as they're rapidly evolving, and that's still driving the cost premium. Now, I will say, I think that cost compression is not just for engineers. It's for, I would say, lawyers, doctors, any kind of knowledge worker, accountants, all the above. Even the conversation I was having with somebody, their child was trained to be a data scientist, and he looks at me and goes, Peter, does this make sense anymore? And I'm like, probably not. It's just changed so much. I mean, yes, you need the background and all the concepts, but the fact that I can go to a model and effectively do it, does it make any sense anymore? I don't necessarily think so. It's interesting.
That's
I don't know.
a tough one. And we always talk about like the workaround for this for decades has been, well, you're paying for value delivered, not for cost plus markup, right? So
Right.
If the value is the value, who cares? Why should you care what it costs me to deliver, as long as you're getting the value for it? But the problem, right, and I get it to a degree, but I'm also skeptical. And I'm skeptical because that value is always relative. In other words, eventually someone will come along and say, sure, I'm willing to do the same work as the first person, but I'm willing to do it for 30% less. Now, if the quality is the same, it might have been worth X, but if you could get the same thing for 0.7X, you would rather do that. And now you've just recalibrated the value, because the value is not an absolute number. That's the flaw in this thinking. The value is not absolute. The value is dependent upon what you can get it for. So if yesterday I was willing to pay $100,000 for an electric car with 200 miles of range, but today I can get an electric car with 350 miles of range for $60,000, that value isn't there anymore in the old car. You could say, well, it's the same car. It still has the same value, but it doesn't, because what I can get, my purchasing power has changed. So I think we're going to see that dynamic in the consulting business and in software development across the board, which is the value is not an absolute, and as the commonly available solutions, become less expensive, no one's going to be able to just say, well, the value is what it is, you have to pay it.
Now you bring up a valid point, and honestly, one I hadn't really given considerable thought about, but I think you're absolutely correct that you probably will see some compression of pricing. And the pricing, I think right now the pricing is really a seller's market, but I do think, like you said, as things mature, and that time horizon is to be determined, it'll fall back onto the buyers, and they'll have much more pricing power in driving the actual cost of these things.
Yeah. Good point. I'm glad you said that what you said about timing, because I don't want anyone to think that this is all happening in months. It could be several years. It could be quite a while. I mean, as fast as the technology is changing, so far human beings can only change at a certain speed, or like we can only adapt to things at a certain speed. And so I don't think we're going to see, the entire consulting industry explode in 6 months' time. But let's humor me a bit. We've been picking. I'm thinking if I were working in an IT consulting business, if I were working in an outsourcing firm, I'd feel pretty beat up right now listening to us talk, right? Like, they'd be like, oh my God, these guys are basically telling me I have no business model. So let's spread the joy a little bit, because we've been focusing on the sector of consulting that is technology consulting. But what about some of the adjacent sectors that are, that are advisory services or management consulting or, tech adjacent consulting, doing, tech strategies and tech audits and evaluations, of people's technology platforms and whatnot, because that's a very large business, and it commands very high fees. How do you see AI hitting that segment of the consulting market?
Well, I certainly see it hitting it quite significantly. I think you and I have had this discussion. In fact, much of what we're building in terms of an organization is around that concept of any kind of knowledge work like that. I mean, not to pick on McKinsey or BCG or Booz or any of those companies, but much of what they do is evaluate, your corporation strategy through reviewing your documentation. Yes, they apply their knowledge and their experience to that and their own view of it, but how much of that can be automated? I would think a significant amount of it, in fact, can probably be automated. Even, I know we look at some of the issues that we've worked on in the past, compliance issues and regulatory issues at banks, and which becomes a once a year thing, but doing it in a fashion where it's done 24/7, so banks aren't surprised by issues coming up is, I think, going to be the newer model. What do you think?
No, I agree with you, and I think what's really interesting is pick any large consulting firm. You and I've obviously worked with most of them over the years, either as buyers of their services or partnering with them or working for them in all sorts of ways. And what's clear is, the people who are in the top echelons of these consulting firms are ridiculously talented and bright. There's no doubt. They have rare expertise. They have great intellectual capacity. They are very, very smart. They are very capable, right?
Yes.
No doubt. And it, and this is true across all of the sort of top tier consulting firms and probably many others that, you and I haven't run into, but we're talking about some very, very top people. They are able to attract the top of the talent. The challenge becomes that in order to monetize the capabilities of those people, those top skilled individuals have to be supported by and surrounded by a small army of enablers. And I don't mean enablers in a bad way, but I just mean people who people who can interact with clients on their behalf. And right, because like if you're that top person, you're only awake for however many hours a week you're awake, and there's a finite limit to how much you can do for various clients. But if you've got this army of people as a force multiplier who can go and do the legwork, who can interview people and review documents and do groundwork and bring you summaries of what's happening, have discussions with you, and then go back and take the output of those discussions and help implement it, now you've got this force multiplier, right? But that force multiplier is people. And that force multiplier is people who are also relatively expensive and talented and highly trained people.
Yes.
That's where I see the opportunity or challenge if you're inside one of these firms in the future is not that you don't need your best and your brightest. They will always have a place. But what about the second best and brightest? Or not to rank people, but like what about the people who are the force multipliers? How many of those could be partially supplanted by or augmented by technology, by AI?
You a lot. I don't, it's like we're describing what really is a different model. Certainly a different consulting model. It's going to change. You and I have said this many times, dramatically. I don't know what the ultimate shape is going to look like. I think at the end of the day, whatever comes out of it is going to be dramatically different than today. And it will certainly be and AI enabled, and I hate to use that phrase because it sounds so simplistic, and what we mean by it is deeply AI enabled, truly at its core, built around the concept of using artificial intelligence as a force multiplier to really be a full service consulting firm, everything from strategy all the way down through implementation, because that becomes much easier to do.
So let's talk about two examples of that then, or two aspects of that to make it real. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the force multiplier aspect of using agents for like a project, and then why don't you talk about the that continuously running agent that we were talking about, because I think that those are, and we can do this briefly, but I think they bring it to light. So when I think about a traditional consulting assignment, there's usually a very large amount of information gathering, for example, right? And you have maybe a small army of a squad of consultants out there reviewing documents and interviewing people. And, it's a manually intensive process. Everything is hard, from getting access to documents to scheduling. You have to do the interviews, you take notes, you go back for follow-up questions, etc. now envision a world, and this is, I'm not saying envision because we do this, like there is a world out there in which rather than me sending around a bunch of junior consultants to do interviews, I can have agents, AI agents, that I have pre-trained to ask the types of questions that I want to know about, and they are equipped with other deliverables, templates, outlines, etc., and they can ask questions of people, and they can ask follow-up questions, and they can ask clarifying questions. Now, can they 100% replace that individual that you might send out to do the interview? Probably not, but if they can do 80 to 90% of the fact-finding, and then I just go ask a few follow-up questions, and they can do it anytime, day or night, when that person has time to talk, and they can autonomously ask follow-up questions, and they're smart. They know about what I'm trying to look for and what I care about. And I can have 100 of them for almost no cost out working on a client engagement. Instead of 20 people, I could have 100 of these agents, and they cost less than one of those people. That's amazingly powerful. So that's just one example of where I think you can use AI. And again, it doesn't replace the people. It augments them in the sense that I still have to have some people going out and asking some follow-up questions and having discussions. But I can do a lot of the legwork without having an army of people doing it.
Right.
That will change. And here's the problem. If I go tell a large consulting firm to do that, I'm basically saying that they should cannibalize themselves. This is the classic innovator's dilemma, which is you've got firms who have invested heavily in training and developing people, and they don't have, it's not in their best interest, at least as they perceive their best interest right now. It's not in their best interest to go and deploy a bunch of AI agents because they have this asset, which is their people, and they want to put that asset to work.
Right, that's how they make their money. But I do think the moat that they're building around, most of them are building around themselves in order to protect that core asset, i.e. people and available hours, is going to be fairly shallow. Because there's going to be too much pressure to change quickly. Some will thrive if they realize it, and I think will even get bigger, and some won't. I'd be interested to see how it plays out, because I think organizations have to get accustomed to having an agent run 24/7 on their cloud to accumulate all this information. It's got to be done in a secure fashion, obviously, but the idea you and I had bandied about and was, I think, a great idea at the end of the day is having agents. If you work at a financial firm, especially post 2008, there are massive regulatory and compliance teams constantly evaluating the business, and very often even the Fed will have employees working on premises of some of the larger banks, asking questions, evaluating documentation, speaking to people. It's an ongoing process that never really ends. Now, a lot of that, I think, can be automated, and having a series of agents run effectively 24/7 so that you as a bank, a bank or an organization that is heavily regulated, this goes true for pharmaceuticals as well, doesn't get caught with issues once a year where they then have to go fix all these problems, or they get notified by the Fed, here we're putting you on the special list where you're in trouble, and if you don't fix it, you get big fines. Now, having agents or a series of agents evaluate your technical infrastructure, look at certain data that needs to be evaluated and looked at, looking at things like lineage, understanding if there are controls around all this, evaluating existing documentation, speaking to people, or asking questions, but doing that on a 24/7 basis and continuously pushing out. You have an issue here, you need to get it remediated. You have an issue here, you need to get remediated. And once a year when you get evaluated, here's the report, here's where we are, here's what's been done, and it's basically here. And not having a $5-10 million bill from one of the large consulting firms to do this for you.
Right. No,
that's compelling.
I love that idea, because if you look at the way consulting firms usually are deployed in cases like this, it's they come in, they dive bomb in, they do an assessment, they make some recommendations, and then they leave, and then they come back again however often later, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, and they repeat that process. And you might get an initial uplift in quality, compliance, etc. but it's sort of uneven, right? You identify
Right.
things, you fix them, and then other things happen. And you identify them, fix them, and other things happen. And so what you're talking about is this continuous monitoring, continuous compliance. I think that is the way of the future, and it really redefines what a consulting organization does, because, through the use of leave behind agents, you could, as a consulting organization, offer continuous oversight and feedback and monitoring.
And I think you said it's continuous. It's so remember, your consulting firm pops in. They always bring their seniors or junior consultants along with them, who they effectively train on your projects. They go to another company. So year after year, you're basically effectively starting from scratch. You're losing all that information that you gave to the consulting firm because those people move on to other projects. Now, having
continuous monitoring as a concept is very, very well proven to bring better results in a different industry, which is in healthcare. Think about the difference that they have seen. Back when people with a chronic disease, so diabetes, for example, if they were getting tested on a weekly or a monthly basis, it was not always the immediate feedback they were looking for. Once you introduced things like continuous glucose monitors, people have real-time feedback on how their disease is being managed, but also on how their lifestyle and their nutrition are impacting them and their disease, and they can they just use that information to act differently and to be more informed. And so it's a case study in my mind that this idea of continuous monitoring is going to get you, at the end of the day, a far better outcome than periodic assessments.
100%. And like you said, this is a well-trodden concept, and it's been around for many, many, many decades, and exists in manufacturing. It's in a lot of different places as a way to get better quality. And LLMs really provide the foundation, so they could process all this unstructured information, which we know in the past humans are great at, hard for machines. Now, really easy for machines. So you can do what you could not do in the past.
Well, Peter, we've been talking about AI and consulting for a while now.
Yes.
I feel like we've had the consulting industry under the microscope this week. Far more industries that I think we could talk about. In fact, I'd love to hear, from anyone who's listening to this or watching this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what other industries do you think are ripe for disruption by AI, and especially agentic AI. If you're working in an industry that's being disrupted, I'd love to hear from you. If you're doing the disrupting, I'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
I think we've talked about now legal and consulting, but you could draw that line to a lot of other people-intensive industries, I think.
And we will.
And we will, yeah.
And we will.
Yeah. But in the meantime, if you're in the consulting industry and you're feeling bruised, I apologize if we made you feel uncomfortable. I think there is a real future ahead for consulting as an industry. It just won't look exactly the same as it does now. And so maybe take that as the opportunity to, if you haven't already, learn to develop some agents. Start thinking about, if you had the ability to create agents to help you in your job, what would they be? What would they do?
Right, exactly. And I think that's the question you should be asking yourself. There's going to be a lot of institutional inertia out there, and I think change for a lot of organizations is going to become very difficult. And I think what you'll see are upstarts, kind of like us, who will hopefully come in and redefine what consulting really looks like at the end of the day.
Yep. Good.
David, another awesome conversation. I think obviously thought-provoking. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And again, questions, just, please reach out. We love questions. And, David.
Peter, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and see you next time on Call Me Data.
Same. Everybody have a great day now. Bye now.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us over on YouTube. And make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well.